Welcome to the Plague Hive. This video feels like a blast from the past. We just checked and it's been almost exactly 2 years that we've done the first video together. I'm joined today by Colin Swisher, who I don't think needs an introduction anymore because he's been on a channel feels like 500 million times already. And he's recently managed a top 4 finish at the recent Battle Hardened Charlotte with the Uzuri deck that we're going to talk about here today. So, welcome, Colin. Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for being here again. Hope you had a great time. I was really sad that there wasn't any coverage for the event. I would have really liked to see some of those games, but you're here today to tell us all about it. So, let's start with maybe the eternal initial question, like, why Uzuri? We've got a whole bunch of different assassins that you can currently play in the meta. And Uzuri is kind of like almost the oldest one. I don't want to disrespect Huntsman, but, they've always been kind of like this, I don't know, ugly duckling, I want to say, of the assassin family. And Uzuri was like the first assassin that had relatively competitive success, back in the day. So what brought you kind of full circle and made you want to bring her again to like a big competitive event? What was the idea there?
I've been working with Tom for a while about this list. I mean, you've seen it before. I've been talking with Tom for a bit. We've been brewing up ideas. I've always thought Uzuri could work.
Mm-hmm.
With the new Hunted stuff, I'm like, I shopped around for a while. I tried Marionette, and I just couldn't get him to really stick with me. Like, I tried a blue version, I tried Tom's red version, and both of them just didn't really feel correct to me. So I'm like, I know this hero very well. I'm gonna go back to the basics. And I asked Tom, I'm like, hey, I feel like Uzuri can work. Can we try something to make Uzuri's strengths just so much better? And he brewed up some lists. There's one during the Viceroy meta that was a lot more heavy on the dagger buffs,
Mm-hmm.
which I pretty much enjoyed. It was a lot more of a flicky game plan.
Mm-hmm.
You may have seen it. Just flick every turn.
Yeah.
But when Viceroy left, he tried a different list that was a lot less flick, but a lot more mid-range game plan. And then
Okay.
I just kind of saw those two lists, and I'm like, I like where these are going, but I feel like I could do it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of made an amalgamation of two. Tried it on Talishar a couple of times, and I'm like, man, this list actually works.
Right.
And I'm like, I know Uzuri very well. She's my comfort girl. So, hey, why not just take her to a Battle and see what happens?
Okay, nice. And yeah, I mean, you got to like third place, so it must have worked out. And some of the matchups along the way weren't what you would normally call like easy matchups for Uzuri either. We're going to talk about the actual like results in a little bit. But first, let's just switch over here and we'll just go through the list like top to bottom, right? A lot of this stuff, if you've seen any video about Uzuri, is not going to be like news, right? So we're not going to touch on like every single card, just basically what's new, why is it there, what's the idea here, right? Some general notes. So like Crown of Providence, Flick Knives, Final Spring Tunic, that's classic Uzuri stuff. I think these have been in basically every single Uzuri list, except for some of the outlier contract decks that ran like Mask of Perdition. Apart from that, this is like standard stuff, right?
No, yeah, of course.
In terms of daggers, also pretty standard stuff. Nerf, Scalpel, Scale, Peter, Spider's Bite. What's noticeable here is not what's there, but what's not there. So there's no Hunter's Clave. Did you feel like the mark cards were not worth the inclusion? I guess we can talk about basically all of the marking stuff, right? Because like all of that is basically out of the window if you don't bring Hunter's Clave, right? You can't run something like Mantle. You can't run Mark of the Black Widow. None of the cards that require mark to really do anything work if you don't have a consistent way of marking the opponent. So without Hunter's Clave, I think these cards are basically not really playable in the list. So what was the idea there? Did you feel like the mark was just like not worth the effort, or did it like pull the deck into too many directions at once? what was the decision point there?
Uh, all those are true. It's just Mark is not great in Uzuri, but
Hmm.
I think the primary thing that makes Mark bad is your stealth base. It's like Mark is good when you have a good red stealth base.
Hmm.
Mark the Black Widow, amazing card, but unless you're running a lot of red stealths that
Hmm.
care about Mark, it's not good.
Hmm.
And there's a ton of decks that just do marked better. Like you have Arachne Marionette that
Yeah.
just gets a free +1 from being marked, and just transformed into a arguably better hero.
Hmm.
Sometimes worse, but overall just a better hero
Yeah.
if your opponent is marked.
Right.
Meanwhile, Uzuri, she doesn't have all the fancy new marked stuff outside of the Mark the Black Widow and Take Up the Mantle. I mean, Take Out the Mantle is a great card, don't get me wrong, but
Hmm.
unless you can actively benefit more from stealth outside of just Take Out the Mantle, not a good card.
Right. Okay.
Like 20% of the time, it's the best card in the deck. 80% of the time,
Yeah.
it's basically just a yellow Razor's Edge.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. So basically the idea is okay. We could do something like throwback to old school Redline Uzuri, right? Where you run stuff like Nimblism, Rabble, all of that stuff, and you have a very heavy red stealth base. But at that point, why play Uzuri, right? Is that
Exactly.
does that kind of sum it up? Okay, yeah, that's fair. Okay. So then, yeah, we're stuck, right? Quote unquote, with the old daggers, which has the upside that you can make your opponent's life very annoying by just presenting them with these debuffs against the decks that want to block. Definitely interesting. Not a lot of those in the meta right now, but there's definitely some decks where the debuffs from the daggers are very relevant. So it makes sense to bring like a selection that you can choose from, and then you can just adapt it. So this is all classic Uzuri stuff, right?
They're
What?
also just very efficient in
Hmm.
the fact that you can definitely filter your hand really well. And,
Yeah.
we'll get into it later, but the new dagger buffs just make the daggers just super efficient.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get to those in a second because that's basically what the deck is about, right? It's about like swinging daggers a lot more than you would normally expect an Uzuri deck to do. Last card in the main equipment we got here is Starting Point. That's also a new card from the Hunted, a common leg piece. And this has a very interesting interaction with Uzuri where you can give anything go again, any attack. Doesn't have to be like a zero cost, doesn't have to be an assassin attack, doesn't even have to be an attack action card. In theory, you can use this on a weapon attack. But you can only do it if you've played a card or activated an ability. And that, noticeably, that's not just an attack reaction, any kind of ability, right? So you can use this, you can do like Uzuri activation into CNC, give that CNC go again. You can just activate Tunic, and that also counts for it, right? Um, so would you say this card is like a big reason why you wanted to try out Uzuri again? Because I think this is like she's really the only deck that can really fully utilize this, or then can get like a large benefit out of this over something like Snapdragons or like Black Text, right?
I think Starting Point is the reason Azuri is actually a good deck nowadays.
Okay.
Like, in the before times, we'd only have Black Tech Whisperers and
Mm.
Snapdragon Scalers, which, I mean, no offense to Snapdragon Scalers, but it just doesn't do enough. Like,
Yeah.
I want to
For
give my
Uzuri
Command Talkers
specifically.
go again,
Yeah.
and the requirement of activating an ability. Wow, it's almost like I want to do that almost every reaction step.
Yeah.
I'm a reaction based hero, so I'm probably going to be doing something. And
Hmm.
at the worst, yes, maybe I have to flick, or maybe I have to do some sort of suboptimal line or like waste a tunic to
Hmm.
get Starting Point active. But I think a lot of the downsides are overweighed by the many upsides of like, oh, my Command Conquer now has Go again.
Yeah.
I'm basically just new now.
Command and Conquer with Go again is definitely very powerful. Yeah, that sounds like a very good reason to pick up the deck, and you can do it at a lower floor than new, right? You could do like uh, play a Command and Conquer, activate your Tunic, give it go again, play Codex, play another Command and Conquer, right? That's a line you can
Oh
do
my
with
god,
this
yeah.
deck, and that sounds brutal. You know, I don't think there's a lot of decks that can really recover from that, and that's a 3-card hand, by the way, right? So that's like a
Yeah.
3-card 12 with like a double Command and Conquer, and then everything, all the other good stuff that Codex normally does, right? So definitely very strong card. Unfortunately, doesn't block, but you know, yeah, we can't have it all. That would be a little bit too good. If
If
this
it
had a
blocked
block
one with
mechanism.
Battle Worn, it would be the best equipment
Yeah,
in the
that
game.
would be crazy. If that was the case, that would be crazy. Yeah. Okay, so that takes care of the equipment. Let's just scroll down real quick to go over the sideboard equipment. There's not a whole lot of it here. We got Widow Whale Respirator for AB1. I assume you just decided that Kano wasn't really something you wanted to be bothered about. So you just go with AB1. Does that about sum it
Funny you
up?
mentioned that. If I can cut you off for a second,
Yeah.
I didn't face just one Kano during the entire weekend. I faced three. So,
Okay. Right. And did you
I
win
mean,
against
AB
all of
one
them?
certainly is not a lot of AB,
Yeah.
but it does help where it matters.
Right, that's true. Especially since it's the good AB1 Spellvoid one, right, that we got in
Yeah.
Rosetta. Like those pieces are fantastic. I really like those. A very, very strong class specific arcane equipment piece. I like those. Okay, and then we got black text in the sideboard. I assume this is like the typical black text thing where you just bring them in against aggressive decks just to have like an extra point of block. Like we've seen a lot of decks recently do this. Like a lot of Marionette or like Slip Through the Cracks decks have done this, where they run like Snapdragon's main board, and then they just have black text in the side for something like Aurora, Syndra. You know, all of the aggressive decks where you have to deal with like breakpoints or on hit effects that you need to block out.
You're mostly correct. It's
Okay.
not for aggro specifically, but just breakpoint decks like
Okay.
Ira, Syndra, like anything that you care about having a swarm or block.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what black decks are for.
Yep, makes sense. Okay. All right. Okay. So we got all the equipment taken care of. Let's go over the main deck here, the main board. Again, I'm not going to go over everything here just because some of this is standard stuff. So you got like Command and Conquer, Death Touch, E-Strike, Leave No, Shakedown, Codex, Isolate, Bonds. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then you got your blue Stealth Base and like Infect, Prognosis, Surgical. So this is all standard stuff, right?
Yep.
Basically every Uzuri list, at least every Uzuri list that doesn't want to go like fully red line is going to look somewhat similar with these cards. So the interesting stuff, I think, are the dagger pumps, right? And I think these are kind of like, I want to say, the main thesis of the deck, like what the deck is trying to do or like how the deck is different from your typical Uzuri deck, right? So you got Savor Bloodshed, you got Cut from the Same Cloth. I kind of want to count Tarantula Toxin here as well, because it kind of does the same thing, right? It's a +3 on a dagger, but it's also kind of like a shred, right? So you can do the whole play a stealth card, shred it, and then swap it for a CNC thing that Uzuri has always been able to do. So that card can do that, but it can also pump a dagger, so it has like flexibility. And then in the sideboard, you also have 3 copies of Up Sticks and Run. So that's a lot of like +4 dagger pumps, right? What's your typical play pattern with these look like? Like, are you trying to just, anytime you see one of those, you just slam it, you try to convert it? Or what does the typical pattern look like? Why are these in the deck? What are they trying to achieve?
For the play pattern, more depends on the hand than
Mm-hmm.
anything. Like, if you have a cut from the same cloth and a blue from hand, and let's say Censor,
Yeah.
because that's the main
Sensor is
combo.
a good example, yeah.
And let's say Bonds of Agony for the blue.
Mm-hmm.
You play the cut, you swing the whichever dagger it's going to be most annoying for him. Let's
Yeah.
say they have 4 attack actions, you swing your Spider's Bite.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they block like shit.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. Then you swing your Censor. If it hits, boom, you just basically shakedown them for a turn, or you basically stone rain them for a turn.
Yeah.
Stone rain works best as an analogy. Yeah. You basically just stone rain them for a turn, and you got to choose a card. And that's 10. Yeah, that's 10 damage off of just 3 cards.
Yeah. Like this
And let's say,
interaction is really really funny because like you get to see their hand and then all of your like hand disruption stuff, like obviously sensor is the most direct example of this, right? Where you just know what they have, so you can name a card. But it also works with shakedown, obviously, right? So you can go like
yeah,
cut, dagger, and then isolate into shakedown or something. Sure, 4 card hand, right? Or you can do the same thing with tunic, and then use a reaction to turn the shakedown on. But you know what they have. You have perfect hand information at that point, so you can't ever miss with your shakedown if you play a cut before that. You can't miss with your sensor if you have a cut in front of this, right? So this is like
no,
a
yeah.
really interesting interaction, yeah.
Then the other angle is Kiss of Death. If we
Mm-hmm.
can go over to that for a sec.
Yep.
Uh, Probably the MVP of the deck.
Okay.
Just the fact that you get a free, uh, yeah, I'm sorry, a free come to fight that does +1
Mm-hmm.
more than a come to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Just makes it so dangerous and just gives a lot of DPS output for Uzuri.
Okay.
Like suddenly, you know, it's just block 6, you'll be fine. They'll just slowly chip at your HP.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, you play a Cuff in the Same Cloth and a Satyr Bloodshed.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, I'm coming for 12. I'll put just
Right.
3 cards.
Yeah.
That's a lot of damage. That's
Pretty.
Aurora levels of damage.
Yeah. That's actually like, I think the main thing about this is, right, if you combine the dagger cards with like actual daggers, they're just turning essentially into E-Strike, right? Because like you turn 2 cards into 5 damage with Go Again.
And you have a resource left
You
over,
have one
ideally.
resource left over, which is nice, right? So it's like a little more efficient than E-Strike. You can do something like Sensor with it, or you can go Tunic, CNC, obviously. So it's a little more flexible. But if you look at just the base damage rate, it's very similar to Enlightened Strike. And like we all know that choosing Go Again for Enlightened Strike is not where you want to be in most situations. Like you'll do it if you have to, if you have like a big hand, your opponent just passed into you, or it's like turn 1 and you just have that. But for the most part, choosing Go Again on E-Strike tends to be kind of like the weakest mode, I want to say. It's the one that you use the most often because that's why it's in the deck as an extender mostly. But in terms of like damage per card, it's not super efficient, right? But once you look at Kiss of Death, right, that actually starts to change a little bit because now this 2-card 5 with Go Again turns into like a 2-card 8 at like baseline, right? And then if you stack a couple more of these, it just turns into a 3-card 12 and so forth. So it's just like a really, really good, inherently above rate damage or way to deal damage, basically. But would you say that you try to play out the Kiss of Death in this way in the deck, where you go like, okay, I'm gonna put a Kiss of Death in Arsenal, I'm gonna wait for like a Saver or like a cut, and I'm gonna try to convert this into damage? Or is it equally as often I use Kiss of Death and then I just swap it into like a CNC or something, right? Because obviously if you go Saver into Kiss of Death and then you swap it, you lose the damage, right? So that doesn't work.
It's kind of 50-50.
Okay.
Kiss of Death, what I'm trying to say here is Kiss of Death is both good as an offense and defense. Like,
Okay.
it's a red that turns into yellow, technically, if you use it for, like, Shakedown. So,
Okay,
yes,
sure.
it's kind of like a double duty in that way.
Yeah, all right.
Similarly for all of your stealths, but this is
Yeah.
your best DPS output and your best resource output because, Uzuri hero ability. You
Yeah,
can
makes
never
sense.
discount that.
Cheat on resources. That's like the main goal of like old school Redline Uzuri. Just like why pitch if you can just play cards instead?
No,
Um,
exactly.
okay, that makes sense, right? One thing I do want to note what you can do with Kiss of Death, and that's like not immediately intuitive. If you swap into Kiss of Death, actually, so let's say your line is Savor Bloodshed, Isolate, and then you swap into Kiss of Death. the Kiss of Death actually does get the buff, right? So in that scenario, you would hit for 7 with that Kiss of Death, and it has like the pseudo dominate from Isolate. So this is something you can use to like pitch stack maybe to close out a slow game against like a grindy deck like Jarl. You can just pitch stack your big Isolate in a late game, and then just swap into Kiss of Death and have some of those dagger pumps along with it. Or Tarantula Toxin, which is always very good with Kiss of Death, just a 0 for 6. Very solid card. Okay, so that basically takes care of like the core ideas here. We have one Conceal Blade. I know that's just kind of like a little. It's a pet card of yours, right? Um,
Yeah,
would you
basically.
say it's more than a pet card? Like, do you feel you just run this because it's a fun card and you like it, or did it actually have like a decent impact on some of your matches?
I would say in testing, Concealed Blade is definitely a great card,
Mm-hmm.
but in armories, it has proved itself to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't had a chance to really show it off at the Battle Hardened, unfortunately.
Right.
But its floor is just so good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, why not just run it?
Okay. Makes sense. If you need like one extra blue and it still blocks 3, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
makes
a
sense.
reaction, so
Yeah, yeah.
gets run overpower. So
Yep, that's true. Yeah, that's yeah, can be relevant against something like Victor, or some other decks that run overpower effects. Yeah. Okay, cool. So
Betsy.
that Betsy, yeah, if you run into one. I have not. I do think Victor is a very relevant deck that is just held back a lot by New and Enigma. I think once those are out, specifically New, um,
Yeah.
once they're gone, I think we're gonna see a lot more Victor than we see at the moment, and I think a lot of decks are gonna have a problem with that actually. But right now he's just being held back by New and to a little bit lesser extent Enigma, and he just can't do much about that. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the sideboard a little bit. Again,
Yep.
some of this stuff is like just classic Uzuri. So we got Shred here. Again, works with the whole play a stealth, play Shred, swap into something else. That's always been a good card for new for Uzuri.
Or is
Um,
there? Yeah.
Uzuri,
I mean, I would think New runs Shred
not
anymore,
great
doesn't it?
for it's not great for new now. Like I mean, it would be
Yeah.
okay, but she just has better things to do than Shred most of the time.
I
So
mean, just play Venomous Bite. It's just better
yeah,
Shred.
just play Bite. It's just mostly better. Yeah. We got Weakest Link and Erase Phase. Those are like your typical sideboard generic disruption pieces. Those will always look a little bit different depending on what the meta is currently doing. They're both good against Aurora. They have some splash damage, like Erase Phase is good against Syndra sometimes. Weakest Link is good against the Mistveil hero still. It's just like poppers in the sideboard are just a thing for Uzuri. Those will always change depending on the meta, so
Exactly.
that's just your regular stuff. Then we got D-Reacts, we got Sink Below, we got Shelter, which I think has just mostly taken the space of Fate Foreseen. In the majority of lists that I've seen, unless you're going like, okay, I just want to have as many 4 blocks as possible, obviously then you're just running all of those. But for like the typical assassin list that's on like 6 D-Reacts, I think for the most part, Fate is out and Shelter is in. Um, Unless you have trouble sourcing them because they're like stupid expensive, but
I
it's a
mean, I
good.
think Fate is just a good card in general, but
It
Shelter
is.
is just you can generally interchange them.
Mm-hmm.
It's I would say Shelter is way overpriced right now.
Oh,
People are just
absolutely,
going crazy over
100
Syndra. It's like,
percent.
oh, I
I
need 3 shelters. I'm gonna have to send it to the moon.
Yeah, I think the thing right now is a lot of decks right now work with like breakpoints or small damage pings, specifically flick effects, and then Shelter is just a really good card against that, right? Um,
Exactly.
Fate has its upsides. Like obviously, once you get to arsenaling a D-React, which is often where D-Reacts will end up, Fate is just better because once it's an arsenal, Shelter does nothing. It's just a 4 block, right? But it has no effect. You don't get the opt. You don't get to sync. If it's not in your hand, it does nothing basically. So I think it's a meta call, right? If we go to like a more, let's say, dominate focused meta, maybe, right, where decks like Azalea are more relevant, and it's less about these like damage pings and breakpoint effects. I could easily see Shelter kind of like falling off the radar a bit and Fate making a comeback because it's just once you're playing around dominate and you want to arsenal those D reacts, Shelter is just worse. That's just just how it is. So I think this is just in the current meta. It's a very good card. It's very new. It's very expensive. So I think it'll
Yeah.
kind of like equalize a little bit as time goes on. Okay, then we got looking for a scrap also very solid extender, has been in Uzuri lists basically ever since Sebastian Kleiner came up with the tech and made the first like blue Uzuri list back in the day. You're running what, like 12, I think, blue stealth cards, right?
Uh,
Yep.
well, yes.
3, 6, 9, yeah, 12. So that's plenty for two looking for a scrap. Very, very solid there. And then we got
I will
pain.
say
Mhm.
that if I can interrupt you for a second,
Yeah, sure.
I will say looking for a scrap has changed a little bit with this new beta because
Okay.
in the past you kind of want to, let's say, it's dire circumstance, you maybe want to flick your dagger, but
Hmm.
with the new retrieve mechanic, you can't really do that anymore without wasting your dagger
Right, true, yeah.
because you can't retrieve from the banish zone,
Yeah, yeah.
as we've seen from Gravekeeping and
Hmm.
Rotten Remains and every other card that banishes one power attacks.
Yeah.
So you don't want to banish daggers like you used to,
Okay.
but it's still a good card. Like versus Enigma, it's very important to have these extenders.
Yeah, you definitely need them, especially the ones that have like breakpoints attached to them, right? Um,
Exactly.
which kind of brings us to the next card, Pain in the Backside, which I think is a very good extender because if the opponent doesn't block it, it's a 0 for 4, which is strong, right? Um, Noticeably, it is not a breakpoint inherently, though, so it only comes in for 3. So, how has the performance of that card been for you, and what decks are you bringing this against?
I've said before I've hated Ravenous Rabble because
Hmm.
it has a chance to miss. I mean,
Yep.
if you've seen some of my stream games in the past, the casters will always joke that I don't have the fancy Ravenous Rabble, so I always never hit a red.
Flip a blue. That's how it goes, yeah.
So paying the backside has the upside of just being consistent,
Hmm.
and for the deck to bring it in, Enigma for one. I
Hmm.
mean, you need all the go again you can get for Enigma,
Yeah, sure.
and decks who just don't want to block but you need to get them to block.
Hmm.
Well, here's a 0 for 3. Block it.
Yeah,
If you don't, deal 1 more damage.
yeah, makes sense.
It being blocked 2 is feels a little bit bad, but
Hmm.
I think that's just mostly because it's shared with the ninja class.
I mean,
And
it's
if it'd
a
be insane with the
yeah, it's a
three
head
block
jab,
attached.
right? Like, I don't think you were ever gonna get the stat line of 0 for 3 with go again on like a 3
That's a
block.
3 block,
I
yeah.
just don't think unless the go again is like very conditional, right? But if it has like unconditional go again and it's just a 0 for 3, I think that's always gonna be a 2 block. Like, doesn't even matter if it's in a ninja class, right? But if the go again is unconditional, I think it has to be a 2 block, otherwise it's just too good. And this one is like, I mean, it's a head jab with a pretty big upside, so definitely makes sense that this is a 2 block in my book.
Notably, also shreddable, also
Yep,
conceal bladeable.
yep. It has
Uh,
all of the upsides that Hurl used to have, right? Sometimes people were running Hurl in the exact same slot, basically, and this is it's just a better Hurl, basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um.
mean, it's a
Yeah.
99% better hurl,
Yeah. Like
but
especially
99% just rounds up to 100, so
especially in a list that runs flick knives like main board, I think this is a lot better than Hurl. Yeah.
yeah.
And then finally, we got upsticks. We already talked a little bit about this when we were talking about the dagger pump. So, why is this in the sideboard specifically? Do you just not want like too many 2 blocks in the main board, or is it just a case of you only bring this in against grindy decks where you try to like flick more often and just need a couple more extra above rate cards to kind of get over the finish line?
Basically, yeah.
Hmm.
Up 6 and run is a great card. I love the retreat mechanic. probably the best mechanic we've seen from a long time from LSS, but just being an incision without, or it's basically an incision that blocks 2, and we already have that in State of Bloodshed. So, but basically, yeah, if you're going to be flicking a lot more, you're going to be flicking to stop flicking your Nerf Scalpel to stop the D-reacts a bit.
Yep.
Upstick and run is where it shines.
Right.
But overall, it's a retrieve card. It's the best one we have.
Yeah.
But you don't want to retrieve in every matchup, so.
Okay. Makes sense. So against like into the more aggressive decks, you just don't really have the space to run these retrieve cards, because they pressure you too much and the game is over too fast. So you just keep it in a sideboard. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, if this game's gonna go long, you'll be flicking a lot. This is where the card shines.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of
like. Other than that, it's basically just incision.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be comparing a lot of cards with incision, but that's basically where the floor is, just incision. And incision is a good card.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
If only it's asking to run it.
That makes sense. All right. So that takes care of all of the cards. Is there anything that retrospectively, like after the event, you would change about this deck?
Bonds.
Bonds? Okay, yeah.
Okay, let's.
I know you talked about this a little bit. So, why is Bonds not a good card in this deck? Like, why would you change it?
Okay, I love Bonds. It's a great card, but without Justinic, this card is shit.
Okay, right.
So, there's a lot of better cards that do what Bonds does, just better. Like, you have Reaper's Call for the surprise Mar for Saber Bloodshed.
Right.
It can also cycle itself turn 0. You have Blue Backstab, which Blue Backstab into Command Conquer is a time and tested true combo.
Always a classic, yeah.
There's just a lot of cards that can do what Bonds of Agony does, but better.
Okay.
Originally, I was thinking, oh, if I play Bonds of Agony, I can probably bluff someone out, or in a late game scenario, I can probably pitch stack Tarantula Toxin and a Shred or something else with it to turn it on. But it just turns out Bonds of Agony is just a bad card without Isolate, or not Isolate, Justinic, or just any way to bump it. Or pump it, yeah.
I think you need stuff like, it doesn't even have to be just a Nick, but you need something like Razor's Edge, basically. You just need attack reactions that work on it, like, regardless of what your opponent does, right? So the problem with Bonds, if you're running something like Shred or Tarantula Toxin to turn it on, if your opponent just goes like, yeah, I won't block your Bonds, right? And then you can't actually turn it on, it's just sad, right? And yeah, the equipment only gets you so far. So yeah, okay, I can see that. Like, this deck is just not running enough attack reactions that just work unconditionally to actually activate the Bonds of Agony. So, and
exactly,
you could probably try to fix that, but at that point you have to make space for something else. So it's probably just easier to cut the Bonds and replace it with a card that actually supports the main game plans. I get that. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And like you said, there's lots of things you could put in there. So you could run, like you said, Backstab or like Reaper's Call. So, okay, cool.
Personally, I think Reaper's Call is what the direction I would go in. But I can see arguments for both sides.
Yeah, I like the fact that Reaper's Call specifically is good when you combine it with Looking for a Scrap, because it's like an easy way to get a blue stealth into the graveyard that doesn't require interaction from the opponent. Because that's always like the problem with Looking for a Scrap, specifically for Uzuri, has always been that you normally don't actually play your blue stealth cards for their effect, right? Normally you play them and then you swap them out for something else. So it's like a lot less likely that they end up in the graveyard unless you block with them. That's typically how you get them there. Compared to something like New or even some of the other assassins where you actively play out those blue stealth cards and then they just end up in the graveyard that way. So that's always been a little bit of an issue for Uzuri, and I can definitely see Reaper's Call being a pretty easy way to fix that issue. That
Also, the
makes sense.
fact that Reaper's Call and Saber Bloodshed is a true combo.
Yeah, that's pretty
I
neat.
mean,
Yep.
if you pitch to turn 0, you draw up a Saber Bloodshed. You're in Magical Christmas Land, but you're happy.
Yep. 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 That's pretty cool. Yeah. You can just like play Saver into Kiss of Death. If they don't respect it, discard Reaper's Call, draw a card. It's just good stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Um, so that takes care of like all of the cards here. Let's go over the matchups a little bit. Like they're configured all the way. So if you want to play this deck on Talishar, you can just load it up. Same as always. Um, just one click of a button, you got all of the matchups set up. So that's pretty cool. Um, do you want to go over any of these like in particular, and maybe we can combine this with sort of like a recap of the games you had at the Battle Hardened? Like what was standing out there for you? Maybe what matchups were like easier or trickier than you initially thought, and is there anything that you learned from the games that you had at the event where you go like, okay, right, in retrospect, I should have done this like a little bit different or something?
I feel like the major reason you should be playing Uzuri right now, and the number one matchup I really want to go over the most is actually Prism. So let's go over
Prism.
that for a
Okay,
sec.
sure. Yeah, let's go with that. I can see that. Okay,
Uh, you run all your poppers in it just
obviously.
because if you pop your opponent's stuff, that's just you're in Happy Town.
Yep.
You also run Sinks for the breakpoint,
Hmm.
mostly Herald of Triumph
Yep.
because it's really hard to pop Herald of Triumph.
Yep.
But
Unfortunately.
overall, the main game plan of Prism is just find a way to get one card out of their hand,
Hmm.
and their whole hand is just bad.
Hmm.
Hand
Yep.
information with the Prism is actually really helpful because, they're going to probably throw this angel, and I can pop this angel,
Hmm.
but I can't pop this angel.
Yeah, or
Or they're
they
going to
have
try
a
to buff this
wrath.
angel if
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Hand info is just always really good, but versus Prism
Hmm.
is actually a lot better than you would think.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because like they have a lot of tricksy interaction things going on, right? You got like angelic wrath, and if you know they have it, right, you don't bother blocking their herald because they're gonna go over the top anyways, or you only block it if you have a D-react, so it's just like the info definitely helps, or if they have a follow-up herald, or if their follow-up is like an aura, or they're just gonna put like a soul shield in arsenal or something. So
Exactly.
you just it helps a lot around navigating their turns, because this is still, Prism is one of those decks where if you make one misstep at a critical point in the game, it just completely spirals out of control and you lose. And I think having the extra hand info from Cut definitely helps with that. Yeah, I can see that. um
Also, Pop Pressure is good.
yep. That's true. Yeah. Now, I like that. I always felt that Uzuri was probably the assassin that has like the overall best matchup into Prism, just because she both has a lot of poppers, comparatively speaking, at least, and she has a good way to play like small hands, right? Like you can play two-card hands very efficiently. That's kind of like what Uzuri wants to do. Like her bread and butter is just two-card hands, right? And then with this deck,
Exactly.
if she just goes like, okay, I'm just gonna take an off turn, like set up an aura or something. If she's not gonna go full Herald spam, but she brings stuff like Genesis, this deck also has ways to pressure her and actually punish her for that. So that's pretty cool. And that's something that Uzuri decks in the past have kind of struggled with a little bit, because you mostly only had like E-Strike and looking for a scrap in terms of extenders, and your daggers are just really not very efficient against Prism because she never wants to block in the first place. So, um,
Exactly.
and this deck can just go like, okay, you're giving me a full hand, let's go. I'm just gonna go like pain in the backside, savor bloodshed, dagger, and then the last dagger is gonna clear your aura or something. So I'm
Exactly.
still threatening a lot of life total, and I'm still clearing your auras, and I'm maybe still disrupting your next hand, if there's like a disruption effect somewhere in there. So pretty cool. Okay. Anything else? Let's maybe go over like some of the most prevalent ones that we have right now. So Aurora, definitely. Kind of like
Aurora is just tricky.
the deck to beat right now, I would say.
I'm gonna
Um,
say I don't love our Aurora matchup.
yeah.
It's definitely the trickiest of them all. I'm still trying to figure out
Hmm.
how to sideboard against her exactly, but
Okay.
I think the game plan kind of shifts between just trying to find a point where you can disrupt her
Hmm.
and that disruption actually sticks, than
Yeah.
punishing her for just having a bad hand.
Yep.
Just make sure a punish game's on tight, and you
Hmm.
might get there, but there are just games where it's just like, I hope Aurora just gets everything she wants and you just lose, and there's nothing you really can do about it.
Yeah, that's it's kind of the problem with like Uzuri's game plan against Aurora is that um, you have to run some of these like generic disruption pieces, right? Like erase phase, weakest link, stuff like that. And they can be impactful against Aurora, but it's not like erase phase against a deck like Dash IO, right? Where you know, okay, every single turn they have is going to be impacted by erase phase, and they can't really play around it, or they can't draw a hand that magically gets around it. For Aurora, that can absolutely happen. You can hit them with erase phase, and you just go like, okay, I didn't want to play any cards that care about being lightning this turn, anyways. I don't care. Or same thing for weakest link. You hit them, and they just go like, okay, here's a hand that has like no instance in it. On average, you're probably gonna hit with those cards more often than not, right? That's why they're in the deck. But if it happens at a critical point in time, you're like, okay, I kept two cards. I'm gonna go like isolate into weakest link, and I really hope that shuts down her turn. And then it just doesn't, and you get hit back for like 25 or something, and the game's just over. You know, that can just sometimes happen. And there's not a lot you can do to influence that, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Mm. And you can't really raise her because the deck doesn't have the numbers to do that. You know, that's the other side of the equation, where you have to hope that your disruption slows them down enough that you can actually, you know, win through that way, and just win with your like somewhat inferior damage numbers, all things considered. Okay, cool.
Honestly, the only way I think Azuri can realistically beat Aurora consistently
Mm-hmm.
is actually Counter Blessings.
Mm-hmm.
Because Counter Blessings,
Okay.
compared with Shakedown and all the other ways to disrupt Aurora,
Yeah.
gives you enough of a buffer to
Right.
really play out your hand.
Okay.
But, you know, everything else in the meta is just very hostile to Counter Blessings right now.
That's true.
So,
Yeah. I
unless
mean,
Aurora becomes 99% of meta, I don't think Counter Blessings Azuri can really keep up.
like even against Aurora, count your blessings is sort of like a it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Like on the one hand, it gives you a life buffer to survive her onslaught. On the other hand, the problem with Count Your Blessings is it doesn't block, and Aurora has some pretty scary on hits sometimes, right?
Yeah, Burn Up Shock is definitely
Burn
an
Up
issue.
Shock is a card, and then when she gets to like combine that with some of her other on hit effects, like a Channel Lightning Valley or something, you're suddenly in a spot where you're like, okay, I wish this card in my hand blocked so I can like, you know, weather this turn. And then sometimes it just doesn't work. So I feel like CYB, even against Aurora, is kind of like tricky to actually utilize well, because it can just backfire and you just have non-blocks in your hand when on a turn where you really need to block. So it's a little bit tricky.
Like I said, CLB is not the be all end all answer for Aurora, but I do think if Aurora just dominates everything,
Mhm.
I do think CLB is the natural answer for Azuri.
Okay.
Even if Azuri is the natural answer, which I don't think she naturally is, like where she was with Lexi.
Yeah, this is not Lexi, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah,
The main thing I think about these decks is that they can just play around Arsenal hate so much easier than Lexi, right? Lexi
yeah,
basically had to you have to Arsenal because it's your Ranger deck, right? And you run New Horizon. If you don't Arsenal, that's just useless, right? Um, and these other aggro decks can just go like, okay, I'm just never gonna Arsenal a card. I'm only gonna Arsenal like D-reacts that I can just play out in response to you playing in isolate, or instance like Channel Lightning Valley that can play out in response to you playing a Command and Conquer, and then I just don't care about your Arsenal disruption, you know. Um,
exactly.
So that's definitely something that is a problem for Uzuri, yeah, specifically, just because like Command and Conquer is a critical part of your arsenal, and if the opponent can play around it to an extent where it never does anything except for having like vanilla 6 damage, you're just in a much rougher spot than you would be otherwise. Yeah. Okay. Any others here that you think are like worth talking about specifically, or is this like mostly self-explanatory stuff? Maybe we can go over new for a second because
Oh
I
yeah,
feel
of course.
like that's also a matchup that's relatively prevalent. Like, I think the overall consensus is still that new is probably the most competitive assassin deck right now, in terms of like matchup spread and overall game plan. So what's the plan here? Like, how do you go about beating that deck?
Right. Uh, like with other assassin matchups, it's a skill matchup.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, the better assassin will probably win. But the
Fair.
thing with New is just she can just get all the best things. Like she
Hmm.
has Bonds of Agony to just absolutely blow you out of the water and just set you on the back foot for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think it's playable if you know how to approach it. And
Okay.
the best way to really say is just practice.
Okay.
Keep your best blues out of your banish zone, ideally,
Yeah.
especially Persuasive Prognosis, because
Don't play
if
this.
that gets into your banish zone, that will be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, bonds too sometimes, you know? Sometimes they just have a chi and they can just go like play your own bonds and then that just hurts.
Ideally, you're cutting bonds after this, but
Right, yeah.
yeah, I
That's
agree.
stealth buff to the new matchup is just cutting bonds entirely and then they can't play it against you. Pretty nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, if any of you out there have any other like questions about any of the matchups, right, just leave them down in the comments below the video, or alternatively, you can come find us on the Spiders Web Discord, which is actually run by Colin here. He came up with the whole thing. So I'm gonna leave a link to that in the description of the video. You can just join up, and we're both pretty active on there, so you can just drop questions, and we'll be around to answer them. Um, with that, is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything you want to tell people about Uzuri, about this deck, or about your run at the Battle Hardened? Any tales there?
So I do have a few funny tales.
Hmm.
Let's actually go over everything that happened at the Battle Hardened,
Sure.
round by round. Round one, I probably faced the one deck I don't want to see at all, which is Kano.
Hmm.
Round one Kano, I'm like, oh boy, this is gonna be rough.
Yeah.
Uh, it was the new player, very nice. They were talking about how they weren't expecting to do super well at the Valorant, but they wanted to play anyways.
Okay, that's
Uh,
cool. That's the spirit.
it gets to that point where you all fear it, you all know it. Kano's about to die, so they pull off Kano shenanigans. And I feel really bad for this, but it's going to be a common issue throughout the day. They screw up their combo.
Right.
I don't remember what it was exactly, but they, I think it was a Kindle,
Hmm.
and they drew a red when they were supposed to Ragamuffins into a blue.
Oh, okay,
I don't
right.
remember what it was exactly, but they did screw up their combos somewhere, and
Yeah.
when I was at 37, so I think they could have maybe got there if they did it correctly, but
Okay.
at the end of the day, it's a battle hardened.
Yeah, sure. Like,
Round two, it was actually a friend of mine.
hmm.
Uh, hey Dracus, if you're watching this, he was on Vincent,
Hmm.
and it was a very grindy game. I banished a lot of his what we call it, the rune chain generators, the
Yeah, Malefic, yeah.
Malefic incantation. Thank you.
Hmm.
I got a lot of his Malefics. I think I got two of his reds and one of his yellows,
Hmm.
and I just kind of grinded him out of the game. It
Yeah.
wasn't like a full fatigue where I fatigued other Vinsets earlier in the day, or later in the day, I should say. But at the end of the day, I did get there through a lot of grind.
Hmm.
Vinset's very grindy match, a lot of blocking, a lot of prevention, and just kind of finding your point where they have no rune chance. Their tunic's down, so they can't reduce a rune chance you. So it's just your chance to go.
Yeah, it's a weird matchup because like I feel Vincent games typically go like one of two ways. Like either it's grindy, right? Like the way you described, especially if they're playing like the more defensive version of the list. That doesn't have easy ways to just go like double or triple rune gate in one turn.
Yeah,
Or it's just like a kind of hilarious blowout because you banish a couple of cards early in the game and then they're just kind of stuck on blood depth and they just kind of die to their own effects. Like that's typically how those games, or you just lose. You know that also happens against Vincent.
welcome to playing Shadow.
Sometimes you just lose, but it's like either it's a really grindy game or they just die to their own blood depth. If you're winning the match, that's typically how it goes. One of those two ways, in my experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Round 3, it was Prism. As I described earlier in the day, just try to get a card out of their hand, and then they fall like paper.
Okay, makes sense. They are like noticeably worse on 3-card hands. That's definitely true. Yeah.
Exactly. I just managed to claw out some tempo, and they really couldn't get it back, so that's how I won that match.
Nice.
Enigma, this is one I feel a little bit bad about. This is one of my locals, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, if you're watching this video. Again, I'm sorry, man. I didn't want to do this to you. But competitive REL. So what happened was he blocked with his Traverse the Universe when he had a Mirror Guy in hand. And then he just immediately went, oh, I'm going to sink below. Then he realized, oh, I didn't do my Traverse trigger yet.
Right.
And it just felt so bad because, like, it's competitive REL. And I just told him, sorry, man, that's a missed trigger.
Yeah. That's fair.
I felt bad about it. But
yeah, but like you said, it's a battle hardened, right? I think one thing you have to sort of like internalize if you're trying to play competitively is to sort of, it's not an armory, right? You're not playing like your mates at an armory Friday evening, you know, where it's like, yeah, just, you know, do it, it's fine, no matter. But at the end of the day, like having the concentration, right, to play your lines correctly, do the sequencing correctly, and do that is a skill that needs to be trained to some extent. And it's a skill that's like as relevant as being a good deck builder and knowing your lines and having practice on a deck, I think. And is a skill that's as relevant as remembering to bring enough like hydration and food to the event. So you actually no, it's true, right? Like people forget that.
I agree.
All of this, you know, it's like a whole package. Like there's many different aspects that come together to make somebody a good tournament player. And I think like having like the concentration to play slowly enough, right, to not forget stuff is also part of the game, right? Obviously, you should never try to abuse this against anyone, right? Like if you
please don't rule shark anyone. Please do not start
don't rule shark.
Do not start a Brody. Do not start a Brody.
don't do that. Rule sharking is not cool. But I think being in a spot at like a competitive event where your opponent makes a mistake, right? And you're like, okay, you made a mistake. Sorry, it happens. Like I make mistakes all the time, right? Like in games, it's also something that I need to work on. And then like not letting them take back that mistake doesn't mean you're like a bad person or something, right? It just means that okay, they were unconcentrated. It happens. It's part of the game. I think that's just at competitive events. If you're doing this at an armory, that's a different story. Like you should probably reevaluate. You should reevaluate your priorities there. But if you're doing this at like calling, battle hardened, whatever, it's totally fine. And I think it's part of the game, and it should be like the normal thing. Nobody should feel bad about that. So yeah, that's at least
unfortunately
my position, right? So like think about that as you want. If you disagree with me here, like feel free to leave that in the comments as well. I'm always up for constructive criticism. We can have a discussion about it there.
I'm always up to the criticism as well. Again, I thought what was correct, and I thought the judges would agree with me that it is a missed trigger. We are in the
Yep.
reaction step. We have missed our block triggers.
Yep.
So it's not really something we can rewind back to,
Hmm.
and it would be a significant change in the what's what what's word I'm calling
Like
looking
basically
for
rest of
here.
the turn sequence, right? So
Yeah, it would
yeah.
change the turn entirely
Yep.
if he did miss or did get that trigger. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
again, if I did it myself, I wouldn't let my opponent or I would hold myself to the same point of remembering my traverse trigger.
Yep.
I don't play Mystic decks that much anymore, so I can't really talk that much on it.
Yeah.
But again, stuff happens.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that's how the cookie crumbles. I did take the game, but again, it's a Battle Hardened. What
Yep.
can you do? You gotta play slow. You gotta play methodically, and even if it's very much about, I'm very sorry. Very much a matchup you should win.
Hmm.
You can't play like, oh, I'm gonna win this automatically. I'm just gonna get lunch. That's just not how it
Yeah, that's a trap that people sometimes fall into where you
goes.
get like
You gotta play it out,
overconfident,
and
right? Like you just gotta
no,
play out
exactly.
everything. Yeah. Same goes in the other direction, by the way. Like even if you play something that you think it's a bad matchup for you, right? Or you know it's a bad matchup for you, you shouldn't let that influence your mental space. And that's very hard to do. Like I have problems with that myself all the time. Every time I play against the Prism, I go like, oh fuck this. I don't want to play this right now, you know? You just have to kind of, sit down and just do it, just play it to the best of your ability. If you lose, it happens, every deck has bad matchups and it's just part of the game that you sometimes lose, but you should still give it your best, and just try doing whatever you can to win the game. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you gave it your best shot, and that's just how it goes.
Again, part of the tournament mindset.
Yep.
Like every matchup is winnable.
Yep.
Just gotta play it.
Yep. It's just all about the mental space. Yeah. Okay.
Round 5, I played New.
Hmm.
Very nice guy, Will. He's on the Spider's Web. If you're watching this, hey man. Very close game, very tight. Both play. We both played to the best of our abilities. Very tight game. But at the end of the day, the one-up Death Touch into Isolate did seal the game. I did have a Coax and Arsenal with my Black Deck still available,
Nice.
just in case I did need to go that route. But
Yeah.
thankfully, just got there in the end. I had one card left in deck with like 3 cards left in general, so I was
Okay.
very close to getting to a fatigue
Yeah.
state, but thankfully didn't get there and just managed to barely squeeze it out.
Nice.
It's a very close match. Like again, skill matchup.
Hmm.
You can go either way, in my opinion. But if you practice the matchup enough, it's very winnable for both sides.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, for sure.
Round 6, I faced my second Kano. What a what is my luck?
How many Kanos were at the event? Because it was like, I think I remember it
Four,
was like 170 people, something like that, right?
like 4 Kanos.
4 Kanos in 170, and you ran into like 2 of them. Okay.
What is my luck?
Yep. Let's go.
Thankfully, also got the dub versus this Kano.
Nice.
Wasn't a misplay on their part, but I just had the Tarantula Toxin and Shred on a Kiss of Death. They were at 7. Had a blue for insurance. What can you do?
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty good. Sometimes you
So,
just like. I mean, that's I think an upside that this specific iteration of Uzuri has over like the more traditional Uzuri list is like this can go a lot more aggressive compared to like your regular Uzuri deck, right? So you give the Kano less space to find their stuff, and that's what you want to do against the Kano is like make the game as fast as possible, right? You want as few turns as you can manage for them to reach lethal, because the less time you give them, the less time they have to find their combo and kill you, basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
Death Touch into Inertia also helps the matchup a ton
Oh
because
yeah, it does.
if you have a combo piece, it just goes straight to the bottom.
True. Yeah, that's definitely strong. Yeah.
So 6-0, lock for top 8. Now
Nice.
I'm just playing for placement. So next round, I face the first seed,
Mm-hmm.
or who's going to be the first seed, Rose Smith on Dashio.
Mm-hmm.
She gets to go first, and if you know anything about Dashio versus Uzuri, whoever goes first usually has the advantage, and
Mm-hmm.
it's Rose Smith. I could have played a little bit better. I sideboarded the wrong boots in,
Mm-hmm.
so I was at a minor disadvantage. But, you know, two max Vs, what am I going to do?
Yeah, okay, right.
Back to back.
If they had two max Vs, I don't think like you can recover from one typically, but if Dash IO hits
Not
like
two.
two max Vs against pretty much any deck, I think she just wins, right? That's kind of her win condition um, at the moment. Yeah.
It'll be funny, but I did hear from Rose with after our top 8 game versus Michael Fang that
Hmm.
she, or I think it was, don't think it was Rose who told me, but someone else, but she got 4 max Vs off versus Michael Fang, and Michael Fang still won, so
Michael Fang is just I don't know.
Michael Fang just built different.
Yeah, he's built different for sure. Yeah, four max V's. That's like that's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's ridiculous.
Okay, he was playing Enigma, right?
He was playing Enigma, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if any deck can weather like four max V's, it would be Enigma. I think. Yeah.
No, definitely.
With the right setup. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Round 8, I'm still thinking, like, I'm still locked, I'm just playing for my placement.
Yeah.
Then I come across a second Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
This Vincent is the same one I faced in the top 8 round, so
Okay.
very nice guy. He was very happy to get this far. Wanted to get the dub to ideally get locked for top 8, but
Yeah.
as we've all seen, he was already locked.
Right.
Uh, this was a long game, and kind of went down to the very last turns where he cracked his book, did a call into a Blood Moon,
Mm-hmm.
or that's what the card's called, right? The Make a
Yeah.
Rune Chant.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Tried to go for a blowout turn. Unfortunately, I did have enough gas and life back in the tank to just weather it. And
Okay.
end of the day, he got fatigued, and I
Right.
just got the dub.
Yeah. Like double cull seems rough normally. But if you can tank it and then you can kind of like outlast them, yeah, they're just kind of fatiguing themselves by constantly banishing stuff, right?
Yeah,
So that's always like an available win condition for you. Yeah,
I did also get to go first, so I did have that advantage.
yeah, yeah. It's so weird. Like normally on Uzuri, you don't want to go first. Like Uzuri is pretty bad at going first. Like sometimes you get lucky and you can get off like an isolate into death touch or something, but for the most part, your turn zero is just like, okay, maybe swing a dagger to filter my hand, arsenal something, pass. That's it. That's your turn zero, right? There's
I don't know where
just
this myth came from. Sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
there's this myth now that Azuri has a really strong turn zero. I mean,
That,
if we're in Magical Christmas Land, yes, I hit you for 0, or I hit you
yeah.
for 6,
Yeah.
and maybe give you a death or a blood red pox, but
Yeah.
that's really about it.
Like I don't see it. I don't
No.
see that Uzuri has like or any assassin for that matter has like a good turn zero. Like the only one is maybe if you get the complete god roll with Slippy and your opening hand is like toxicity, kiss of death, tarantula toxin, and you
Yeah,
can just go, hey, so your starting life total isn't 40, it's 30. And now we're gonna go into the game, you know? Okay, sometimes that happens, but that's probably like one game out of like 50 that you actually open that. And for the most part, you're still happier going second with like any assassin, actually.
exactly.
Except for maybe like hardcore fatigue new lists that just care about getting as many cards out of their opponent as possible. Um, but there's just so many decks in the meta that like actively going first just because they have good setup, right? And against those, you just want to go first actively just to deny them that, even if your own turn zero game is just like, okay, whatever, you know? But
Exactly, yeah.
like any wizard, basically any rune blade, right? Dash IO certainly too. They just all want to go first just because they have a good setup. So
I mean, Uzuri's turn 0 isn't amazing, but it isn't bad by any means.
Hmm. Like the problem for me is like you just don't have any setup. Like the best you can hope for is getting like a one power stealth into the graveyard. So your first
Like a
looking
good
for a
card to your
scrap
arsenal,
is
that's about
immediately
it.
live. Or you just put something like a D-React or an Isolate into your arsenal. That's always good, right? But it's like it's not amazing. When the ceiling to your turn 0 is like, yeah, Arsenal a good card. Any deck can do that, right? But you don't have
Exactly.
setup. That's kind of the point. So yeah. But yeah, I like the fact that in Flesh and Blood generally who wants to go first or second isn't something that's easily answerable. It just always depends on what's the matchup, what decks are you playing. Whereas in like the vast majority of TCGs, you always want to be on the play, right? And in Flesh and Blood, it's a question of okay, what are you actually playing, and that
Exactly.
answers the question. So I like that a lot about the game because it makes it an actual decision and not just hey, I won the die roll, so I just have a better chance of winning now.
I mean, that still is true in
It's
some matchups,
of
but
course, it's still true. Yeah, sure. But it's
like there's
just
a lot of matchups where if you're forced to go second or forced to go first,
yeah,
it does suck a lot. Like
yeah,
versus old Viscerai, like if
mm,
you're going on the, let's just say going second, you're at a major disadvantage
definitely,
because they
yeah.
just get a free, like I maybe they get a what should we call it, read the rune setup.
Malefic
They
or
get a
read the runes or something. Yeah, they just get set
exactly.
up. They just have good setup. Runeblade just has really good setup. Even Aurora, and she's like in terms of setup probably the weakest of the Runeblades right now.
I mean, she has
But
decent setup enough,
yeah,
but
even she has stuff. She can just make an embodiment. Maybe she has like a Channel Lightning Valley that she can already stick on the board. So
yeah,
she can do stuff. Maybe she makes a rune chant or something. She has stuff she can do on turn 0. It's not bad. And other aggro decks don't really have that, so that's definitely pretty good. Yeah.
I mean, Sidra can like 1 damage or so with their Reflect Knights, but that's about it.
Yeah, maybe that's about it. Yeah. Okay. So that's your 8 rounds of Swiss, right?
Yep.
And then what were the top 4 matchups? Like what was the quarterfinals?
Top 8 was the Vincent I just faced in round 8.
Okay, like
Uh,
back to back, just the same matchup
yeah,
again.
just
Okay.
back to back.
Right, right.
Uh, Matchup went a lot differently this time. I know you
Okay.
mentioned that sometimes you just blow them out with
Yeah.
damage. Like he tried to go for a lot more of a setup plan because you're gonna find his Malefic and bah. I'm so sorry, I cannot pronounce that word for the life of me. Malefic
Yeah.
incantations. And he couldn't find them, so I just went, oh, I'm just gonna aggro you down.
Right.
And I
Okay.
aggroed him down.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have
Got a
your
sneaky Dimensional
setup, so
Toxin.
I'm gonna try to finish you before you find your setup. Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Uzuri can race down pretty well with this list, so
Yeah, like I can definitely see that the dagger pumps are just like very good extenders.
they also provide a lot of pressure,
Hmm.
so it's like you're dealing 5 with a good on hit as well.
Yeah,
That makes your opponent's life just so much hell.
pretty solid. Yeah, for sure.
Then top 4, I face Ira. I don't love this matchup,
Hmm.
but it doesn't help that when I play my cut from the same cloth, I see a blue, 2 dual threats, and a CNC.
Okay.
And I'm like, fuck, I have no way to disrupt this.
That's pretty. That's
Fuck, I'm gonna take
that's
a lot of damage.
yeah. That turn hurts. Yeah, especially like double dual threat. That's like wow. Yeah,
Yeah, it
that's rough.
hurt. I
That
had the
sounds.
block 12 on the CNC, but
Yeah, that sounds pretty rough.
unfortunately couldn't get there in the end. I got him down to 2, but if you know anything about the IRA matchup, it's like, sure, you're getting them down to 2, but do you have enough tempo to end the game?
Yeah, yeah.
Which I do not.
Like if you're also low and they have kodachis at that point, it just becomes like really really rough.
Exactly.
Um, so very glad that they banned needles before that deck was a real thing, because
We
I
do not
think
talk about Niels in this house.
yeah, like that would have been a very different meta if needles were still a legal card. I think yeah. So
Yeah.
good catch, you know, getting rid of that preemptively, I think, and not having it around for like the first couple of weeks of ProQuest or like Road to National season even.
I think it would have been legal for Charlotte, or no, it would have been illegal for Charlotte because we just got the
We
BNR.
had a BNR before, so it
Yeah,
probably would have been out by now. I still think it was the absolutely correct call to just immediately axe the card because like
I agree.
it would have been just too stupid. Yeah. All right. Okay. So very good run still. Top four finish with Uzuri, who's like, I still feel even when Shoma Yamamura won the Pro Tour on Uzuri, I still feel like people don't take Uzuri all that seriously. You know, like
No,
people
people
just go
never
like,
will.
yeah, it was just it was just Uzuri. Like she was good against like the top decks in the meta, but she's not really a good hero. You know, stuff like that. So I'm definitely very glad to see that this is still proven wrong basically on a continuous basis. She's not like this S tier deck that you can just pick up and just do well with her. That's definitely not the case. She's a tricky hero. She's not super easy to play. And you have to sort of like understand how she operates in turn to get value from her. Something that I find with a lot of like newer players looking at Uzuri is they just go like, okay, like my hands just kind of suck. You know, that's
Yeah,
something you hear a lot. And if you look at the average Uzuri hand in a vacuum, it doesn't look super good, you know, in terms of like raw value. And you have to play her for a while to understand how to actually get value from her hands, you know. So, but if you're interested in Uzuri, and you want to give her a spin, I think this is a pretty good deck to do so, just because this deck has a lot more agency than like the kind of older Uzuri decks, you know, that we had before, which didn't have these dagger pumps in order to scale up their hands when they needed to, you know. And I think this is something that's a really cool addition and a really cool new thing that the deck got from the Hunted. So if you're like, hey, I've been trying to, you know, or meaning to try out Assassin, I wanted to give this class a spin, and maybe you don't want to play new because she's like, I mean, I was about to say because she's super expensive, but unfortunately, that's kind of true for like every single assassin. This
two
is
thousand
not,
dollars.
it's not a cheap class. Like, so if you're new to the game, like really super new, and you want to get like into one of the classes, maybe assassin is not the best class to start a game as. I love the class. I play almost nothing else, but it's not a cheap class to play. That there's no way to go around that, and there's no good budget assassin deck either. That's also a problem, right? Like a lot of decks, especially the aggro decks, you can just kind of scale them down and make like a budget version, and that works pretty much the same. It's just a little bit weaker. With assassin on a budget, it's just a completely different deck. Like the deck doesn't do the same thing as the full power list because so many of these like really good effects are on the expensive cards, stuff like Command and Conquer, Codex of Frailty, right? Stuff like that. So it's
I
tricky.
know Sloop Dupe did a recent video with a ASC or a Slippy or whatever
Right.
we're calling them now on a
Yeah.
budget build, but
Okay.
I do think if you want to build Uzuri to be at the highest level, it's really hard to do it on a budget.
Yeah.
But even
100%.
then, if you're playing on Talishar, if my advice to a new player, just get some games in and
Yep.
understand what your opponent's hero is trying to do.
Yep.
Because
That's really
once you
important.
understand what your opponent is trying to do, then you can alter your game plan
Yep.
to try to counter that.
Yep.
Azuri is a counter hero.
Yep.
There's no way around it. Her agency is not all there,
Hmm.
but the best Azuri players find a way to input their own agency into every matchup by understanding when is my opponent their weakest and how can I get them to that point.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, this is critical for like every assassin, but I think, like you said, it's the most critical for Uzuri due to the way that she operates and the way her hero ability works. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. With that, I think it's time to wrap up this video. So thank you guys for watching this. Like I said, list will be in the description of the video if you want to give this a spin on Talishar. If you got any questions, any comments, leave them down below the video. And thank you again, Colin, for taking the time, for being here, doing this with me. Always love to have you on the channel. And yeah, with that, see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you. Goodbye.